Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Better Left Unsaid podcast with me, your host, Jessiara Marriott. Guys, it's our first mini-sode. It's a mini episode. I wanted to take a break in between the deep and very real topics for the first two episodes and bring you guys a mini episode. In this episode, I really wanted to talk about healing your inner child. This has been a topic I've been wanting to talk about for 4 years since becoming a mother myself, and I recently done a video over on TikTok where I was with my daughter and I just spoke about how much I love being a mum, how much I love having a daughter specifically, and how much having a child has healed my inner child. It's such an interesting topic, and it's one that I think a lot of us can relate to, because in that video that I made, hundreds of you in the comments were relating and saying that you can relate to the same thing and how that video healed your inner child. So I wanted to dive deep. I wanted to explore, my backstory regarding this, why I said what I said, and reveal some very interesting things that I learned about myself the second I became a mum. And you can listen to this episode even if you're not a parent. I feel like a lot of us can relate to this universal experience of healing our inner child. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Okay, yes, I've definitely been thinking about it, and whilst I do think some things are better left unsaid, I'm just not about that, not at all.
If you are new and this is your first time seeing my face and hearing my voice, hi, I'm Jessiara and this is my podcast, Better Left Unsaid. This is where we dive into topics that we often don't talk about in the real world. This is stemming from mental health, motherhood, parenting, disability, relationships, and navigating life in your 20s. In this podcast, we don't beat around the bush. We say exactly how we feel, why we feel it, and explore ways in which we can help ourselves and others listening. And if you want to join in the conversation yourself, you can follow us over on TikTok and Instagram at Better Left Unsaid Pod and use the hashtag Yes I Said It to join in the conversation. So before we get into it, let's first talk about what is an inner child, what is healing your inner child, what exactly does it mean? Is the parts of you in your younger years who may have felt unseen, unheard, and misunderstood. And now going into young adulthood, becoming parents, etc., that is healing those parts of ourselves where we have felt misguided and misused and misunderstood. For me, let's get into it. For me, my childhood, if you haven't seen the past two episodes where I went more into my childhood and my upbringing, my childhood was an interesting one because I was fostered, I was in foster care, and going from different families into different families and seeing different dynamics and how mothers parented their children in their different environments, their different homes, different cultures. And my background is Caribbean, I'm Jamaican. So I feel like what I say in my experience may be different to yours depending on where you're from and depending on where you grew up. So I grew up in a family that was close, yet distant. It was a mix of love that was very confusing for me at the time, and even, getting into my teenage years, certain ways in which we would show our love was really confusing to me. And through this and through relationships and men, I have to say the M word, through men and relationships that I had in friendships as well, I then discovered my love language, but we'll get into that. So with my family, we were affectionate, we'd hug each other, we'd give each other kisses, but we would never verbally say I'm proud of you or well done. Obviously we were praised, we were celebrated when we achieved things in school, for example, but it wasn't like another family who would be outwardly physical and scream and shout to the rooftops on every little achievement that was done. It was more like, great job, move on to the next thing. And I guess that helped me. My mother and father were both present in my life up until a certain age, but they were also distant, but they were distant in a more literal way. My mother had her own mental issues, which I discussed in the past two episodes. She, had her own struggles, and at the time I had no idea what was going on. It's only until me being 23 with two kids and being able to have gotten to the stage where I've forgiven her and had discussions with her, but we'll get into that. It was more when I was a child, it was how she showed me love, how she delivered her love to me was through different mediums. So like art, she was very artsy, she's very creative. That's where I got that from. She would show her love and appreciation through drawings and artwork and paintings and through physical things, through activities. My dad was more poetic. He was truly a man with words. And this is where I got my love for English and English literature and poetry and everything like that. So before I was adopted and, brought into a different family, my parents showed love in a way in which I now show love to my kids, which is interesting because when you say you're healing your inner child, I feel like we automatically connect that with trauma and having a trauma response. So even though my mother and my father was physically present, they were emotionally distant. And when I was adopted and, lived with my family who I grew up with and going into my adolescence and my teenage years, I built that resistance of not really liking physical attraction and physical attention and anything physical for that matter. I didn't really discuss my feelings because in my family, it just wasn't something we did. Not really on purpose. It was more just that was how we were. It was kind of like we dealt with our things in private. Unless it was a public family matter, then obviously we'd talk about it. But even then, feelings and emotions wasn't really something we discussed. And going into teenagehood, going into my young adult years before meeting my partner, before having kids, I was very emotionally distant, incredibly emotionally distant, to the point where it was concerning for my friends. And even in that relationship that I was in my teenage years, between the ages of like 14, 15, all the way until 17 years old, this relationship was abusive. It was a physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually abusive relationship. It was a relationship that kind of brought me back to my inner child self, if you will, where I kind of felt that physical disconnect, but the emotional attraction, which was weird because I didn't speak about my feelings. However, because I had that experience with my ex, it almost forced me to get one with my emotions and discuss how I felt. But even then, that was a shit show, which we'll talk about in a little bit. When I did become a parent and become a mum at the age of 19 years old, you need to show this tiny thing love. You need to show this tiny thing appreciation because kids are visual. Kids need to see things. They need to hear things. That's how they learn. That's how they grow. So if you go back to episode 2, where me and my partner discussed our thoughts and feelings on becoming young parents, this was an interesting time for me because when I first became a mum to my daughter at 19 years old, my relationship with my own mother was incredibly toxic and incredibly filled with trauma and just unhealed trauma. And not from anything direct. It was more just how we both, in the years coming up to me becoming a mum, it was how we both dealt with that, how we both dealt with our relationship and healing our relationship, or trying to heal our relationship. So then when I became a mum to my daughter, Amara, I was forced into feeling this ushy-gushy, lovey-dovey feeling that I've never felt before. It was really weird. It was not my character to be so maternal. And when I say maternal, I mean the most stereotypical definition of maternal you can imagine. The mother who is hands-on and lovey and very feminine, which that's a whole topic in itself. But I was not a feminine female. I, if anything, took on that masculine trait. I always have. I've always been the more masculine. I'm saying this in quotation marks for those who are listening. I've always been the more masculine female in just my character, and especially how I was in my relationship with Corey in the beginning, in the early days. Because I never had a partner, he really valued hearing my thoughts and my opinions about tiny things, why I was upset, why that thing he said hurt my feelings. Whereas I was very fight or flight. I would run away from the situation. I would deal with it on my own. And then I'd come back to him a few hours later and just pretend like it didn't happen. Which that's an incredibly toxic and bad way to go about it. If that is your way of dealing with confrontation, then we have to talk. Like, I am in no way judging you, but that is a coping mechanism that is very deep rooted in childhood trauma and in childhood neglect and X, Y, and Z. Having kids and becoming a mother was truly the most transformative metamorphosis I could have ever experienced in my lifetime. And it is something I am incredibly blessed to be able to have experience is motherhood and birth, pregnancy. Like, I am incredibly blessed to have experienced all of that through the pain, through the tears, through the yelling, through the sleepless nights. Like, motherhood truly is something. It is a journey. It really is a journey, and it's subjective to the individual. This is something I really need to preface now. Motherhood, parenting is subjective to the individual. We all experience similar things when it comes to parenting and motherhood. We all experience similar things in general. We all go through some sort of hurt, some sort of heartbreak, some sort of sadness, despair, grief, in different ways, because we are all different individuals. We are all different people living different lives. However, when it comes to motherhood and parenting, we all share similar experiences. You know, the sleepless nights, the tantrums, the terrible twos, the not wanting to eat your dinner, the yelling and the screaming and the no and the hitting and the biting and the fighting, and we all go through it. However, when it comes to how I parent my kids, it is not reflective of how I was parented at all. And I feel like a lot of parents will say the opposite. How they parent their kids is very reflective of how they were parented as kids. But for me, because I have learned over the years that the way I was parented, and this is no hate, no shame to my family or my aunt or my mum and dad at all. It is more over the years and over healing through my car accident, through my abusive relationship, through my hurt and mental health issues that I've had in the past. This is what has helped me. And that is parenting my kids in a way in which helps them grow and develop into adulthood. Because I think, let's talk about it actually. I think when we become parents, the first time we become a parent, it's like, oh, I'm raising this baby, this thing, this tiny thing that relies on me. And you forget, well, at least I did, that tiny thing is only tiny for a minute. And then you have a lifetime of this tiny thing that grows and develops feelings and thoughts and emotions, and it starts to put together sentences and it starts to comprehend things. Like, that's crazy to me. So when I first became a mum, I was like, I'm raising a baby. Like, I'm raising this baby to be a baby, and she's not going to grow up. She's not going to turn into anything bigger than that. And then she did. And then she turned 1, and then she turned 2, and she started hitting and biting and throwing things and questioning me and saying no. And then she turned 3 and started asking questions about everything. And then she turned 4 and she started being this sassy little teenager, a 4-year-old, a 13-year-old in a 4-year-old's body, essentially. That's what she is. And then she starts asking questions about minuscule things that I wouldn't even think to answer or question at all. And then she starts to put 2 and 2 together. She starts to ask questions about the world and about her race and about her hair and her identity. And I was like, wait a minute, you were just a baby. You were just this tiny thing. I think we forget about that. So when I think about how I parent my daughter in a way in which enables her character to be strong-willed, independent, but also to allow love. Because I didn't allow love in my life at all, stemming from the age of 6 years old when I was adopted. I was adopted at 6 years old. Before that, a complete blur. And why is that a blur? I couldn't tell you, because it's not like my childhood was particularly traumatic at all. It was more me blocking out, I think, parts of it that I just didn't want to remember. Because I wasn't capable of love, and I wasn't capable of loving because of how I received love and how I saw love, I said to myself, you have a daughter. I have 2 kids, by the way, if you don't know, I have 2 kids, but my daughter specifically, it is so important for me to raise her in a way in which I can look back and be like, I'm proud of that, you know? When I parent with purpose. I parent in a way where it will help her enable her character. It will build her character. It will strengthen her character. I parent her in a way in which she can love other people and allow herself to be loved, in a way where she's not defensive and feeling like she has to restrict herself from feeling emotions because of how I parented her. I don't want that. And I feel like as mothers, if you're a mother listening to this, a mother with a daughter, let me know how you feel about this. As mothers, I feel like we are all trying to parent our kids in a way in which they can talk to us when they're teenagers, you know, when they're 16 years old, when they're having boy or girl problems, when they're having like school issues and like puberty issues, like topics like that. I feel like we're all trying to prep ourselves for that point where the day where your daughter comes to you and there's like, there's this boy at school that I like, there's this girl at school that I like this person, like, what do I wear on this date? You're preparing yourself for that moment. And if they come to you in that moment, you feel like you've won. And if that moment doesn't happen, if they're sneaking around and if they're going behind your back, you feel like the worst parent in the world. You automatically think, what did I do wrong? And in those moments, and when that moment comes, if that moment comes for me, if that moment comes for you, don't second guess your parenting, because in the end, that's just how your kid was meant to be. But I feel like that's a conversation we can have another day. Let's move on and talk about forgiveness. Because this video is talking about healing your inner child, I feel like a lot of that healing stems from our parents. I forgave my mum a few years ago, and it was very random. I never saw her that much, you know, after we came to live with my aunt, for a lot of reasons, mental health being a massive part. And I forgave her because I forgave myself. I had no extra hatred to give, you know, like the years leading up to the car accident were tiring. They were stressful. They were long. I wanted to leave school. I wanted to change environments. And then I moved to university and I met my partner. And here we are today. In forgiving my mother, I forgave myself. And in forgiving my mother, it allowed me to understand her perspective, understand her point of view. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I have a very different relationship to my mother than you have with yours, and maybe your mother was a little bit more challenging or distant, reactive, and you may be listening to this and thinking like, I can't forgive her because of X, Y, and Z that she did to me or said to me, or how she acted, or how she behaved, or how she reacted. And I completely get that. I feel like because we all have different parents and because we all have different experiences with our parents, like some of us grow up in a 2-parent household and it's amazing, it's lovey-dovey, no issues there. Some of us grow up in 1-parent households, which was the case for me. Some of us grow up without our parents at all. And I'm in this point in parenting that in forgiving both of my parents, not just my mum, but my dad as well. My dad was a little bit more distant, but he made up for it in the last few years of his life, and he passed away in October 2024. And when he passed away, my relationship with him was the best it's ever been. Like, he was really trying to make up for those years that he lost with me and my siblings. However, it's like the second he passed away, I realized, shit, I do not know who this man is. I found myself asking questions about him to my siblings and to my mum. And I was like, oh, you wasn't that bad. Because I never actually knew you. And I can't blame myself for that. Guys, when he passed, I really beat myself up about just how I was a daughter to him. Because you always think about how your parents are parents to you, how your mum is to you, how your dad is to you. You never think about what kind of kid or person you are to them and how that impacts them. And it can be hard, especially if your relationship with your parents are a bit sticky, a bit difficult. But in my case, my dad was amazing in the last few years of his life. And it was more how I was a daughter to him. When he passed, I forgave myself. I did. I had to forgive myself, because if I didn't, I would have continued my adult life wondering, questioning why he was the way that he was, why he did X, Y, and Z, why he didn't show up. But I had those answers when he passed. And it's so crazy how that happens when they pass away. You finally find out who they are, which I think is cool. I found out some amazing things about him, and he truly was a gem. He truly was a gem. Not crying in this episode. I cried in the last one. I'm not crying in this one again. But he truly was a gem. And like I said, allowing myself to forgive my parents allowed me to become a better parent myself. It allowed me to love unconditionally. It allowed me to accept love unconditionally. And don't get me wrong, I'm still a tough cookie. Like, I still have my moments where I'm like, I'm feeling a certain way, but I don't really want to talk to anyone about it. Kind of want to deal with it and move on. And that comes from a place of not really wanting to talk about my feelings, more wanting to just keep it moving and just keep things going. I don't like to dwell. You've learned this now. I don't like to dwell on things. I don't like to sit in my feelings, but it's important. I will say this. It is important to feel your feelings, feel them hard, feel them heavy, but move on. And don't sit in it for too long. Because what is that phrase? If you sit in shit for too long, it doesn't stink anymore, does it? So don't feel your feelings for too long. Feel them temporarily and then move on from them. This last section, please don't hate me, but please try and understand where I'm coming from. Your childhood trauma is not caused by your parents. The reason why you want to heal your inner child is not because of your parents. Your parents have nothing to do with this, actually. Trauma is a result of experiences, specific experiences, that has left an imprint in how you go about your life and how you continue with certain things and make certain decisions. Trauma is a result of deep-rooted feelings that are unresolved and not tended to. In my circumstance, I'll bring back to the car accident. I was in a car accident about 6 years ago now, and my trauma from that accident wasn't because of the accident itself. It's because of the experience that I had with the accident, the aftermath of the accident, how I dealt with the accident. It wasn't the actual accident itself. And I feel like a lot of you may disagree with this, and I completely understand why. However, when it comes to healing our inner child and healing parts of our inner child that we felt didn't receive the love and attention that we wanted, it can be really easy to blame our parents, obviously, because they are the ones that was raising us. They were the ones that was there. They were the ones that probably evoked those emotions. But I like to think of it, and I don't know if that's because of my experience or because I'm a parent now, but let me know your thoughts. Now that I'm a parent, I can see certain characteristics and character traits that all parents have. I have them as well. My partner has them as well. Your trauma is a result of how you deal with it. Your trauma is resolved from healing. Your trauma is resolved from confronting those emotions and confronting those feelings. Circling back to your inner child. Why do you feel certain things? Why do you avoid love and relationships? Why do you avoid confrontation? You need to allow yourself to bring yourself back to that position, even though, yes, it is difficult. Yes, you may cry. Yes, you may scream. Yes, you may not want to revisit it, but it is so important that you do. That is the only way we grow. That is the only way we can heal from it, is by facing it. Facing your trauma makes you grow. Facing your trauma will make you heal. Not all the time. I can't say that. Not all the time. Like, me facing what happened in the accident, me facing the reality that I was the only person that walked out okay, was incredibly difficult, but it allowed me to move on. It allowed me to live my life. It allowed me to parent my kids in a way in which I was proud of myself, and I didn't sit in this guilt, in the survivor's guilt. And it's really hard to admit, but the responsibility relies on us. The responsibility falls on us to heal ourselves. And we can't find that in a therapist. We can't find that in our partners. We can't find that in our friends. We can't find that in our parents. Like, I'm not telling you to go back to your parent who may have abused you mentally, physically, emotionally. You know, I'm not telling you to go back to a parent who really caused trauma, deep-rooted trauma, and be like, why did you do X, Y, and Z? Why did you do this when I was younger? Why did you behave like this when I was younger? Why did you tell me this when I was younger? I'm not telling you to do that, because that can do more harm than good. However, what I am asking for you to do is to delve and ask yourselves, especially specifically to do with the healing your inner child topic, why certain childhood experiences make you feel certain things, or why certain emotions you feel now relate back to you as a child. So why can't you love? Why can't you allow yourself to feel love? Why can't you allow yourself to give love? Why can't you allow yourself to have relationships, real relationships? Why can't you allow yourself to feel emotions? Why can't you allow yourself to scream and shout? Why can't you allow yourself to cry? Certain things like that, we need to ask ourselves. It is up to us to do that healing so we can move forward. And like I said, forgiving your parents or forgiving the cause, the enabler, is step one of that. Let's wrap up, because this is only a mini episode and I can talk for kingdom come. You already know this, but healing our inner child is messy. It can be an experience which causes more trauma. It can be an experience that makes it worse than better, but it's an experience that a lot of us need to do. I am still in the process of doing it. And like I said, I feel like me having my own kids and having a daughter specifically, because of that relationship I talked about with my mother, having kids has allowed me and forced me to do that, actually, because you can't parent to the best of your ability if you have all these deep-rooted issues and problems specifically with your parents and parenting, because you can't parent effectively otherwise. You can parent, you're doing it, but certain actions you may take when it comes to your child in terms of parenting them and disciplining them and speaking with them and negotiating with them, that may stem from your childhood trauma and unhealed childhood trauma. So in helping us heal our inner child, we need to first do that work, don't we? This is not an attack. I feel like every time I say something, you may feel like I'm attacking you. No, babe, this is our therapy. This podcast is all of our therapy. This podcast is a way in which we can discuss these topics openly, honestly, and just get down to the bottom of it. Why beat around the bush? It's not going to do anyone any good. If anything, it's going to set us years and years back. When we want to move on, when we want to be achieving things in our life, if we keep putting it off, years is going to pass and you're going to be 80 years old, sat in the same position, in the same environment, in the same mental state, and you could have, helped yourself years ago. That's what I'm here for. This podcast should be called Collective Therapy, collective healing, because it really all is. We're all experiencing the same thing, like I said, just in different bodies, different perspectives. Okay, my loves, that is all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. And don't forget, if you are listening, you can watch on YouTube. I will link down below in the description bar where you can subscribe and where you can watch my face. You can see what I'm wearing. You can see the hair, the makeup, the look, because I'm doing this all for you. Anyway, my loves, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, some things are better left unsaid, but not here. So let's talk about it. Bye.